So I was right.
David, I know you need that.
I do need that. Tell me I'm right, darling. Tell me I'm right.
You're listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, where HIPAA and humor collide to make learning fun. Your delightful hosts are Donna Grindle and David Sims. Relax. HIPAA help is on the way.
Welcome to episode 360 of the Help Me with HIPAA podcast. I guess if this were degrees, we'd be coming full circle today.
And there we go.
We are off. We are off to a good start. As always, today's show is provided to you by Cardin and HIPAA for MSPs.
Yes.
Do want to remind everybody the Privacy and Security Bootcamp is coming up. 3.5-day in-person event, September 12 through 15 in Louisville, Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
You can find out more at PriceSecBootcamp.com. Be sure to go there and check it out. Spaces are filling up quickly. You can also see our our instructors.
That's right.
That are going to be there. We got their bios up so you can check them out. And there's some other people that will be there that we are not putting on the site. Can't tell you about that. This is a surprise. But it's going to be a great time. I'm going to teach everybody how to properly implement privacy and security within your organization.
Or at least to know what you don't know.
Yeah, that in and of itself could take even more than that. A week-long conference. You don't know what you don't know. That's an interesting comment when you think about it.
Well, we're going to get philosophical now, David?
No, I'm just thinking that recently I've had conversations with MSPs that are annoyed with the pushback they're getting trying to help healthcare clients do privacy and security.
Yep.
I mean, there's a big problem with that statement. It could be true, but it also could be that some people don't know what they don't know. Now, is it the client and the prospect who doesn't know what they don't know, or is it the MSP who doesn't know what they don't know? Because sometimes
I think it's a little of both.
Yeah, absolutely. But as an MSP, a client may be telling you that they don't know that they're supposed to be doing this, or they may be telling you, I do want to do privacy and security, I just don't want to do it with you. So maybe it's something that you said that didn't sit well with them. And, you have to remember when you start going down this path of healthcare IT and HIPAA, oftentimes you might be talking to people who know what you know or know a little bit more than you know about certain things. So you're traveling a little bit outside of your wheelhouse, which means you could get caught BSing.
Well, and then there's often you have to do all of these things to be compliant, and that's not necessarily the approach to take.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually picked up a nice client recently because the MSP came in and said, these are all the things you have to do, and you have to do them now. And the client gave them pushback, and the MSP said, I'm sorry, I can't do business with you if you're not going to do all these things and do them now.
Wow.
And they just don't understand. The MSP doesn't understand what it is they should be doing, how they're held liable or not. Because I think a lot of it was fear-based. I think this MSP was afraid that if their client didn't do these things, it would come back on them.
Yeah.
And so they just don't want to deal with it. And so they drop them, which is fine. They can come to me. I'll pick them up. And, we'll go down the path properly. But all this is to say, when you don't know what you don't know, it can cost you.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be covering a lot of that in the PriceSec Bootcamp. So check that out.
Yeah. And HIPAA for MSPs, we try to teach you what your clients really do need so that you can properly propose things in different levels for them.
Yep. Yeah. Another thing about HIPAA for MSPs I think is really cool is that you and I do a quarterly webinar that's for the MSP's clients or prospects. So the MSP doesn't have to go out there and say, I've got to create a webinar. I got to create marketing content. I got to create this stuff. We do all that for them. They just have to get the people there. They invite them there. We teach them what has to be done. And then the MSP can swoop in and say, okay, now that you've understood, now that you know what you don't know, let's have a conversation. So I think that's pretty cool.
Well, it's trying a different approach, and that's why we did the relaunch of it. So,
yep.
But PriceTech Bootcamp, if you're a HIPAA for MSPs member or Cardin Club member, you get special deep discounted pricing, and you can learn more about both at cardinhq.com and HIPAAforMSPs.com.
That's right. All right. Before we go into our next segment, as always, thank you to our donors. We definitely appreciate it. If you want to be a donor, let me know. Go to our website and you can find out more. Or you can just cut me a check and send it.
If you're not going to cut a check, go do 3 or 4 reviews on your social media and introduce us to one person each week.
There you go. There you go. We'll take that.
There you go.
All right, here we go. Let's get rolling. Oh, by the way, today's episode is called "What Would You Do?" And we have Donna Kionis with us, and so we're going to go through some scenarios, and it's not just something we pulled off the top of our head. These were scenarios that were sent out to a bunch of practice administrators. We'll go into more of that. Not
privacy officers.
Privacy officers. Yeah, well, in our world, sometimes they're the same people.
True that.
But we'll cover all that in a little bit and find out what would you do faced with some of these scenarios. But first, now for the HIPAA.
Say what?
Segment. So let's get into this is going to tie into today's episode. We're going to talk about breach notification.
Yeah, we went through this before many times, but it's a constant discussion when you start, oh, well, we've got 60 days to report a breach. No, that's not what the law says. The law says without unreasonable delay. That's the first thing. Without unreasonable delay is what you're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And in no case later than 60 days after discovery of the breach. So without unreasonable delay is the part everybody seems to skip.
Yeah, they do.
And that's a thing that is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. And I've even had many discussions trying to say, we talk about it all the time, that the number of breaches that are reported on day 59.
Yeah.
You notify patients the very last minute, and that's not the way it's supposed to work. So, and there's some cases bouncing around right now with timeframes, and it has a lot to do with business associates using their own timeframes to notify their upstream. So when we talk about business associates, you're either an upstream or a downstream.
Mm-hmm.
So whoever you're providing services to is your upstream, and whoever you purchase services from is your downstream.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Imagine if I got a backup vendor that waits 59 days to tell me, and then I wait 59 days to tell the healthcare provider, and then they wait 59 days to tell.
Or they do even longer. And it's supposed to be in the business associate agreement how long that you must report a breach to me without unreasonable delay, and in no case greater than 60 days. But there is nothing in the law that says that is what the contract requires. You can request less. And in fact, we recommend that your business associate agreements with your downstreams request 3 to 5 days. A lot of reasons. But here's the thing, is so many of these business associates are also making their own decisions about whether it's a reportable breach, and ultimately it's your responsibility. So another thing that I'm really starting to see and thinking about, of course, now if I'm downstream, I don't want to see this. But if I'm upstream, and then I want it to be in the contract. So it goes both ways. Everybody's like, "What do you want in your contracts?" And I'm like, "Well, it depends on which side I'm on."
Yeah.
But the ultimate responsibility is to the patient. So the law says it must be in the contract that they will report to you according to the law, but you can then reduce it. But here's the kicker is a lot of the contracts say that you're going to report an incident.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I need you to report if there is an incident that involves PHI, but not reporting it. So what I'm really getting at is I want language in there for my downstream that's going to require them to tell me in 3 to 5 days, whichever one I'll start with 3, but I won't go past 5. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then the other piece is that we can't just assume that they're making the right decisions. And that's really a lot of what we'll talk about later in the episode. So I'm now starting to say, look, even if you do an evaluation to determine whether this is a reportable breach, I want you to tell me about the evaluation, that you did it and how you got there. I don't want you making a decision and then never telling me about it.
Right.
So anyway, the 60 days is not how long you have. 60 days should be the worst case scenario, not the planned approach. So there you have it. BA to BA. And I actually didn't do business with a group because I said, they said they would do 60 days. And I went, no, 35 days. I have responsibility to my upstream. Well, you can still meet your responsibility after we tell you can do whatever's in your contracts. And I'm like, well, then I'm not doing business with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's just unacceptable. So, and I walked away. It will not be long before everybody gets it, though, when we're looking at, short times and requirements in these notifications in the state laws that we've talked about.
Now, there's 2 different types of breach notification. Well, actually, there's more than that, but we're talking about breach notification to OCR, or are we talking about breach notification to patients?
Well, if a notification to a patient is required, then you must also notify OCR. It's just the timing of when that occurred.
Okay.
Only thing is based on that.
And then explain a little bit about the difference between a 60 calendar day notification and a 60 days from the end of the year notification.
Right. So if there is a need to notify more than 500 patients, 500 or more, and it always gets down to, I have 499.
Yeah.
So 500 or more is what it says, and those have to be done and without unreasonable delay to both the patient and OCR. Right? It's always supposed to be without unreasonable delay to the patient.
Right.
And that is a required element. The only difference is how quickly you have to notify OCR. So if it is 500 or more, OCR gets notified in the same time frame as the patient without unreasonable delay, and no case later than 60 calendar days. OCR, on the other hand, you can notify on a single case, less than 500. You can send in their notifications at the end of the year, no later than 60 days after the end of the year. And because of that whole leap year thing, now I just tell everybody, make sure you do it by the end of February. It could be the first or just do it by the end of February. That way you don't have to do any counting or commute. It's always going to work.
Yep.
But I encourage people to do it throughout the year for a lot of reasons. One is for most groups, it reduces the workload because you think about it year end, all the things that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to add to it the requirement to make sure you're doing this. Now, I say, go ahead and just get it done.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. And I don't know that it matters, but I also wouldn't want to run the risk of having to report multiple ones all at the same time at the end of the year. I'd rather kind of drip feed them in.
OCR says that doesn't, trigger things, but I would bet there are scenarios where it would trigger things.
Yeah. I mean, if you got one report in and it's like, here's one with 10 patients. Okay. If I got 6 reports in to 10 patients from the same place at the same time, I'd be like, wait a minute.
It could kick out.
Yeah. I don't know. It might be one of those things that it depends on who sees it and who's the investigator and all that. I don't know.
It's a fact-specific determination.
Yeah. I mean, as well as I do with anything, not just OCR, but when you're dealing with investigators and people that get to make their own independent decisions, you're going to have different results with different people.
Mm-hmm.
All righty. So that is our HIPAA Say What? And that moves us into the 405D tip of the week. We are on practice number 7 of 10.
Vulnerability management.
Yeah, and this is where Donna gets to use the word vulns. Vulns.
Look, I don't like to type one letter more than what I have to, right? Vulns.
We just call them V's. V management. VM.
So for small organizations, they recommend that you schedule and conduct vulnerability scans on servers and systems under your control to proactively identify technology flaws. So it doesn't say laptops and desktops and servers. It says servers and systems under your control. So keep that in mind that, other things that are accessing may have a problem.
Yeah, all devices.
Conduct web application scanning of internet-facing web servers, such as web-based patient portals. Specialized vulnerability scanners can interrogate running web applications to identify vulnerabilities in the application design. Now, if you're not hosting your portal, it is possible that you could have that portal address scanned and you just need to tell the vendor that you're doing it. It's not a bad thing, but you should tell the vendor you're doing it, because if they scan it and see it and they go out and attack somebody that's just doing work for you, that doesn't go well. Conduct routine patching of security flaws in servers, applications, including web applications and third-party software. Maintain software at least monthly, implementing patches distributed by the vendor community, and always patch critical vulnerabilities within 14 days.
I'm glad they said that instead of immediately. We always run into that in the IT field where, we don't necessarily want to push things out immediately.
No, not. It depends. It always depends. But within no later than 14 days of a critical one being announced, it needs to be loaded.
Yeah. And, I just want to make sure that people understand this is vulnerability management, not vulnerability identification.
Right.
Meaning it's an ongoing thing.
Yeah. You check it, you fix it. You check it, you fix it. You check it.
Yeah.
It's not like a one and done kind of scenario. It's just never going to happen.
But think about how many times your phone has updates on software. I mean, every day I go to my phone, and I don't have a lot of stuff on there application wise, but every day something's got an update on it. For some reason
that doesn't get people's attention.
And, there's tons of things on your network that need to be updated. Software that's out of date and needs to be updated. Firmware that's out of date needs to be. I mean, it's never ending. It really isn't. Now, I'm also glad they said at least monthly you should be doing this stuff. So it's a lot of work. Just this one thing is a lot of work. So you probably need somebody internally or externally that's going to be doing this doing this for you, because it's not something that's easy to do. It's time consuming.
And you don't just do the Windows. You do the third party.
That's right.
All right. So hit the medium large, and then we get on to our story.
So for medium large organizations, obviously do everything that the small ones do, but you also need to implement your host and vulnerability endpoint scanning. And this is where, we're talking about everything that is on the network. And, they're looking for identity weaknesses in the operating system and third-party applications that may reside on those endpoints and servers. They also utilize strict configuration management and change management procedures. Have a testing plan that should be part of your management process, and include vulnerability scans on new network connectivity, such as, changing a firewall. Hello. New system functions, a new service. Hey, how about this? A network printer. Those types of things. I mean, just because it's brand new, we just got it yesterday, doesn't mean it doesn't have vulnerabilities all over it.
Indeed.
So check those things out. You might even want to see if you can check them out before you get them connected, but certainly as soon as possible when you're connected. And then lastly, establish a routine of penetration testing, because these types of tests, sometimes called red teaming, and penetration testing, there's multiple pieces to that. There's no such thing now as just a penetration test.
Yeah.
There's different ones, but your goal is to look for, ways that people can actively exploit things on your own environment, and do that before the bad guys do.
Well, and it's a free service for critical infrastructure, which healthcare falls under through CISA.
That's right.
Which we talked about before, that you could get a free external scan of your, every month, free external scan of your IP address to make sure there's nothing sitting there screaming, hey, let me in.
So, I mean, pen testing is a bigger conversation, but just understand you can't just say, I need a pen test. Because Donna just brought up, there's an external pen testing, there's internal pen testing, there's social
physical
engineering,
pen testing.
Physical pen testing, social engineering pen testing. So there's all these different ones. There's no such thing as, hey, just give me a pen test anymore. And also it depends on what it is and how far you want them to go and all this other stuff. So anyway, there's a slight difference between vulnerability testing or vulnerability scanning and pen testing, but be sure to ask the questions and make sure you're getting what you need. Because I've even seen some applications for insurance lately that ask about pen testing, but when you look at the definition of what they're asking for, they're really asking for vulnerability testing. Not pen testing. So
and that creates confusion. But I mean, we have a client that has been with us for years, our consulting and assessments and all of those and training. But they first called us asking if we could do a penetration test. And I'm like, we don't do that, but what is it you think you need one for?
Yeah. Yep.
No.
Yeah,
that's where we met them.
I'm going through a similar conversation now with another vendor.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that brings us into, what would you do?
What would you do?
Donna Quinones. She's going to jump out of the closet. That's what I need to do. I need to do like a physical site penetration test. And then, just when I've got people freaked out, you're going to come out of the closet. Oh, it's Donna.
So this is a survey of 123 privacy officers, 1, 2, 3, that were members of AHIMA, American Health Information Management Association. I'm a member of AHIMA. But the interesting thing they were looking at is, here are some scenarios. This is what you know. Will you report this, or would you report this to OCR? And, obviously the patient, but reporting it to OCR. The conclusions of the study, the findings show there are gray areas where privacy officers make their own decisions, and there is a difference in the types of decisions they are making on a day-to-day basis. Future guidance and policies need to address these gaps and can use the insight provided by the study to get there, is what they're saying. Mm-hmm. So I thought it would be interesting for us to look at what they presented to them, and they just said, here's what you know, report or not.
Well, here's one thing they didn't say is, would you report or not based on whether or not it's your organization?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I bet some of them are like, yeah, if this happened to somebody else, I would tell them to report. If it happened to me, I'm not so sure.
Exactly. So they're trying to, in the survey, okay, just would you do it if you were in this position?
Right.
So the first one is pretty straightforward. It's just like, boom, report or not. This is all you know. You don't get more information. What we're giving you is what you know. And the breach of patient PHI occurs, it is not clearly identified as reportable. So it's gray. Is it clearly identified as reportable? Will you report or not? So what would you say, David?
I would say that if it's not clearly identified, and that's all I know, I would not report.
Yeah, me either, because if you give people information and you're like, well, I don't really know if I should tell you this or not, but
yeah, I think that would cause more problems than it solves.
Yeah. So, and what was interesting is 39% of the respondents said they would report, but the rest said no. Interesting. And we'll get to, when we get to the end of this, we'll talk about the difference in that gray area of the difference in the decisions being made and what that difference is. So scenario number 2, your healthcare facility was unlawfully entered. The individual who broke in potentially had access to 450 paper patient records that were held in that office. No security cameras were able to record it, although office supplies were gone through. Only a printer with no PHI was taken. Your policies and procedures are all up to date. However, they do not specifically address breach determination or break-in for your facility. All policies, procedures, training, risk assessment management are in compliance. Your next step is to review the 4-factor assessment to determine if this is a reportable breach. So upon review of the 4-factor, so the 4-factor assessment is the nature and extent of the PHI. So its records are paper. That's one thing. And include multiple types of unsecured PHI, including all of those identifiers, because it's paper records, paper charts.
Mm-hmm.
The unauthorized person who the disclosure is made to. Well, the unknown individual broke into the facility. Nope, they weren't authorized and they shouldn't see it. Whether the PHI was actually acquired or abused. Employees cannot distinguish if the records have been disturbed, accessed, or read. And then the extent to which the risk has been mitigated. Well, there's no evidence that they were read and they weren't taken.
Right.
So you got to decide report or not to report. What are you going to do?
I would not report.
So what would your reason be for not reporting?
I would say there is a low pro-co.
Low probability of compromise.
Yeah, I mean, I think somebody's not breaking in to read through the records and leave them there.
No, they broke in to steal stuff.
Right. So I don't think, given the scenario, if I'm breaking into place, I'm not hanging out to read. Therefore, if I'm after the PHI, I'm going to grab it and run. But none of it was missing. There's no indication that any of it was even read. So I just think there's a low probability of compromise, even though she had access to the records. I don't think the confidentiality, integrity, or availability have been compromised.
And here's the other piece is they could tell where the intruder had been.
Mm-hmm.
They could tell where the intruder had been because things were messed up. They were a mess, and they could tell what they took.
Yeah.
So that is information that I would include to say, look, we know where they went, we know what they did, and they weren't impacted in any way. I would say that you could probably make a reasonable argument that nothing that as you said, the CIA was not impacted.
Yeah. And, if I grabbed a folder and read it and tried to put it back, chances are I'm not going to put it back in the right spot.
Mm-hmm.
Again, breaking and entering, you typically in a hurry. It's not like you're trying to be super careful
right
in what you're doing. This is kind of a smash and grab thing. So
yeah.
I don't see it being. I think it's more reasonable that it didn't happen than did.
Now, if they picked up a stack of charts and ran off with them, yeah,
different story.
No doubt about it. If that area had been ransacked, yeah.
Yep.
No doubt about it.
Yep. Because then I would say there's no way. Let's say that he went in and didn't look at any of them. He just grabbed all the charts and just pushed them off into the floor. I would report that because at that point, I don't have enough faith in saying that there was not a compromise of that data, because he very well could have looked at it. It's obviously been tampered with. It was touched. So I would definitely report that.
They did officially access the records.
Yeah, whether they looked or not, don't know, but they opened the record.
I find it really, really hard to believe that they could have looked at the records and you wouldn't have known it.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yep.
I would say that would be what I would say. But in this scenario, 73.2% of respondents chose to report.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. So,
how about that?
Yeah.
So either I'm wrong or I'm in the minority of the right ones.
Yeah. Well, we'll get down and review that in a minute. So now we get our next scenario. Now this one gets into the electronic versions. An employee at your facility clicked on a link from a phishing email which led to a ransomware attack on your facility.
Congratulations.
Right. Payout was required and access was restored to your system. Okay. The attacker potentially had access to 750 unsecured, quote unquote, unprotected or unencrypted rather, patient records in the system. All policies, procedures, training, and risk assessment and management are in compliance. Then you're going to review. So, nature and extent, the records are electronic, multiple types. It was unsecured. They had patient identifiers. You know that the attacker was not authorized to view the records. And you have no idea whether other malware was left behind, which you should. That means you need to have some forensics people checking to see if they can find anything. And you want them to stay there watching.
Yeah, I like the way the scenario says payout was required and access was restored. So it's like we paid it, they gave us access, and we just kept on working.
There you go. We just talked about that, didn't we? Where somebody's like, well, here we go. We'll just keep going. And then whether it was actually acquired or viewed, the system can't distinguish if the records were viewed or copied. So you can't tell for sure. And the extent to which the infection for the ransomware was removed, and the PCs, they nuked and paved. So that one to me is easy. I mean,
that's simple. I mean, you definitely report that.
Yeah, there's nothing
you can't prove otherwise, and there's a high likelihood that the data was stolen, and you can't prove otherwise, apparently. So, based on how ransomware works these days and what they're looking for, and the methodology that is typical, I would say it's a safe bet that the confidentiality was certainly compromised.
Well, and you don't know whether the integrity was screwed up from them, if they paid, that means they got the encryption, decryption key.
Yeah. And sometimes you don't even know about the availability until a long time down the road when you go and go, wait a minute, where's Miss Roddy's charts at?
Yeah, there you go.
What do you mean?
Well, surely that didn't happen in our ransomware attack.
Yeah. We got everybody else's. Why are we missing hers?
So you never know. And that, to me, post haste without unreasonable delay.
Yeah.
Because at this point, you already know. And really, in that case, the only issue is identifying the patients involved.
Yep.
Because that does take time to identify the patients. And you really have to get them all together. You can't, when you have a large number, it's not like you want to go, all right, well, we got 5, send those. We got 5 more. When you're doing thousands of these, you can't do them a little at a time. You have to get all of the information. And I've worked with a group before where the only thing that was accessed was a folder that people they were putting scans of deposits in there, which they didn't need to.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't need to keep those scanned copies, but they were doing it. And now, they changed the policy. It was a big organization. They had no idea that these certain people were keeping copies because might need them. So,
yeah. The other part, and we brought this up in the past too, is this is one of those times when you want to think about, do you really need to keep those 7,000 patient records for patients who haven't been there in 10 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is when you realize that, man, I wish I would have just purged that or archived or something.
Yeah. And, in some specialties, that's a little bit harder decision because they're involved in research studies and the history and those kind of things. But yeah, at some point we've got to let go of data.
Mm-hmm.
Back when hard drives were super expensive, you didn't keep data. You purged your data. You created other kinds of backups of it. And you didn't just leave it out there. So that is a huge, huge thing that we all need to get on board with is digital clutter.
Yeah. I had a OBGYN one time that I think they told me they had to keep records until the birth baby was 25 years old, I believe it, something like that.
Yeah, it depends on state law.
Yeah, it depends on the state.
That.
Yeah. And so, we had a conversation about what to do because the lady was like, look, they're born here and they never come back. A lot of them, but we were keeping this data for that long, and so we talked about how potentially they could keep the data but not keep it live online, so that they
have an archive where it's accessible.
Yep. And so that's what they started doing. They started purging the records annually and moving some of that. They still have access to it. It's just they don't have immediate access to it live on their network.
Yeah. So, but in this third scenario, 91.9%.
Well, good job, people.
Well, but how did the others decide it wasn't reportable?
Yeah, the other 8%, not so sure.
How could you possibly think that is not reportable? Which I just kind of stared at a little bit. So, when they look at all these numbers, the interesting findings that when they evaluated all of these, so you and I were like, no, yes, is our thing. And in the big picture, I think, well, let's go back to number 2 is the one where you said either I'm wrong or with a very small group. And really and truly, they never say whether or not you should. This is on opinions, and we all know about that. We all have
in that case, I was right.
There you go. But it's how many people made those decisions. So I thought it was interesting that they point out in their evaluation and their discussion that the decisions to report or not to report are directly related to the level of education the individual has had, whether it's credentials, bachelor's degree, whatever. The more education, the more. Wait, have we said that you can't possibly be the privacy and security officer and have the exact same training as everybody else in the workforce and do it properly?
I think we have mentioned that in the past.
100 times or more.
360 as a matter of fact.
Maybe. But what they found is if you have the AHIMA credentials for privacy and security, where you have to understand these things, or you've got these higher degrees where you'll sit there and you go read what the law says and make those, but you're taught to do this, that you are less likely to report. And the others are more likely to err on the side of caution because they're not sure. Which basically what you're saying is if somebody's not trained to do this properly, they're probably making some decisions that are not good ones.
Nope.
Like the 8%. Still bothered by that.
I still question the one where I was different from the majority. I still think 73% of the people didn't make the right choice, but that's just me.
Well, here you go. In scenario number 2, well, again, it gets back to we're significantly, privacy officers that have the education, they have whatever, they were significantly less likely to report a breach in scenario 2 than those who weren't educated. So if you are, statistically less likely to report because you know what decisions to make.
Okay.
So yes.
So I was right.
David, I know you need that.
I do need that. Tell me I'm right, Donna. Tell me I'm right.
You're right. If I could pat you on the head, I would.
If I'm wrong, it's because I was not trained properly.
Oh, I get it. Yeah. For those who don't know, I met him when I was training him. So, that was brutal after I gave you a pat on the head. That's all I'm saying.
So you need me to be right.
So the big picture here, though, is really interesting in that, you and I were able to evaluate it and define why we thought it was reasonable not to. Mm-hmm. We could look at it and say, okay, based on the information I have, is it reasonable for me to say that this is not something I need to stir up problems? It's not something that I think is any kind of risk to the CIA. And I think it, the demographics of the education was statistically different. Now, when there's 92% who, to me, that third scenario is no brainer. So they don't even evaluate that because 92%. I would like to know the 8. I'd like to know the 8% because that's really bothering me. So it was 10 people out of the 123 wouldn't report it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, even in the first scenario, I know it was 39% to 61%, but that's mighty close to almost half.
Yeah. Well, 75 to 48. So the total numbers that I was looking at here.
That's interesting. So you've got, in certain scenarios, the majority are doing the right thing, and in certain other scenarios, the majority's not necessarily.
It's showing you that variable of that lack of education of, okay, well, I don't have enough, so I'm not going to report. I might walk that fine line, but on the next one, panic sets in, so I report. Because somebody was in here then I must report. And that's not necessarily always the case.
So, Donna, what you've done, though, is not only have you emphasized that education is key, you've also shot down the entire prospect that HIPAA is easy.
Really? And yet again, we have that gray area, the fact-specific determination, all of those parts, which this study pointed out, that there are a lot of privacy officers making decisions that they may not have all the information they need to make. So, I mean, that was pretty clear. Because you got the 10 in the last one clearly need some help. And you don't know what they answered in the previous 2. They may have said, if they said don't report that one, they probably said don't report anything. Yeah. If you were ever asked, they wouldn't be able to give you the actual reasoning behind it. And that's the key. Right?
Because my doctor
I always love the one, because IT said it was okay. That's what they'll do. On all 3 scenarios. IT said it was okay. It's David's fault.
Yeah. I still bang my head on the desk with the doctor who tells me that they had a breach. They had a ransomware attack that was successful. And I asked if they reported it yet. And they said, let's just move on. Let's just move on as if nothing happened.
I forgot about that. Hadn't thought about that in a while. It makes me a little queasy.
Yeah. I think about it a lot. Unfortunately, it's I can't say too much. I'd give it away. But I think about it a lot. Alrighty. That is our show for today, folks. Thanks for listening. Be sure to share us out on your favorite social media site if you still have one. And be sure to rate our podcasting app. And remember, from Donna and myself, the HIPAA is not about compliance. It's about patient care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.